Good afternoon and a warm welcome to our important and timely webinar titled No Place for Fear, Ending School Violence for Better Mental Health and Learning. We are truly honored to have you all joined us today to address a critical issue that affects not only our children but our society as a whole. In recent years, we have witnessed that there is an alarming increase in school violence and its far-reaching consequences. Dear principals, teachers, and educators, we are fortunate to have expert speakers who have dedicated their lives understanding and addressing these challenges. Their insights, research, and real-world experience will be invaluable as we seek solutions to ensure that schools are places for learning, growth, and safety. Today, we have with us Ms. Jennelle Babb, Regional Advisor, Education for Health and Wellbeing, Section for Inclusive and Quality Education, UNESCO, Bangkok, Thailand. Welcome you, ma'am. And we also have Dr. Yatan Singh Balhara, Department of Psychiatry, AIIMS, New Delhi. Welcome you, sir. We also have Dr. Sandeep Jain, Joint Secretary, Training, CBSE, Dr. Swati Gupta, Joint Secretary, Training, CBSE, Mrs. Sarita Jadhav, National Program Officer, Health and Education, UNESCO, New Delhi, Mrs. Sudesh Gulia, Undersecretary, IT, and you principals, teachers, and the educators around the globe. Once again, welcome you all to this webinar. Now, let me welcome Dr. Sandeep Jain, Joint Secretary Training, to enlighten us regarding the need and importance of webinar. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, तुषारा. सभी को मेरा नमस्कार. देश के 28,000 से अधिक विद्यालय हैं जो कि हमारे 17 सेंटर ऑफ एक्सीलेंस जो हैं ट्रेनिंग सेंटर्स उनके साथ जुड़े हुए हैं और ये 28,000 विद्यालयों के प्रिंसिपल्स, शिक्षक, विद्यार्थी ये सभी इस वेबिनार से जुड़े हुए हैं. इनका मैं स्वागत करता हूं और साथ ही साथ आप लोगों से साझा करना चाहूंगा कि सीबीएसई ट्रेनिंग यूनिट लगातार कुछ एक ऐसे मुद्दों को छूता आ रहा है, एक ऐसे मुद्दों को वेबिनार करता आ रहा है जो हमारे दैनिक जीवन से कुछ से सीधे तौर से जुड़े हुए होते हैं, लेकिन हम आमतौर पे उन पे बात नहीं करते. बुलिंग इज वन ऑफ देम. एक ऐसा मुद्दा जो हर एक जगह घटित हो रहा है, बट वी आर नॉट रेडी टू टॉक. और उसी चुप्पी को तोड़ने के लिए आई एम वेरी हैप्पी यूनेस्को ने एक बड़ी अच्छी सी वीडियो क्लिप तैयार की है, मूवी तैयार की है, शॉर्ट मूवी. एंड द टाइटल ऑफ दैट मूवी इज चुप्पी तोड़ो. तो चुप्पी तोड़े, हम बात करें जो जाने अनजाने में बच्चे एक दूसरे के साथ गलत व्यवहार कर देते हैं, उस गलत व्यवहार को रोकने की जरूरत है और एक हार्मोनी क्रिएट करने की जरूरत है, एक अच्छा माहौल क्रिएट करने की जरूरत है, एक हेल्दी माहौल जिसमें हम सभी एक साथ अच्छे से विकसित हो सके. सो हमारे एक्सपर्ट जो हैं जेनेल बॉब एंड डॉक्टर यतन हमें निश्चित रूप से ऐसे ही एस्पेक्ट्स पे बहुत डिटेल्स के साथ हमारे बच्चों को, टीचर्स को, प्रिंसिपल को जानकारियों से लाभान्वित कर.
National Program Officer, to introduce the speakers and further take the webinar on. Over to you, ma'am.
Namaskar and a very warm welcome to our esteemed audience, all the principals, teachers, our dear learners today. We welcome each one of you to this very interesting webinar, which is being held to commemorate the International Day Against Violence and Bullying, including cyberbullying. It's wonderful to connect with you all, and it gives us great pleasure to introduce our two eminent panelists who have joined us today. I would like to introduce our first speaker, my colleague, Ms. Jennelle Babb. She is the Regional Advisor on Education for Health and Well-being based in the UNESCO Regional Office in Bangkok. Jennelle has been working in the areas of HIV prevention education, comprehensive sexuality education, school health, and young people's health and well-being for more than 15 years. In her role as the regional advisor, she leads the implementation of UNESCO's strategy on health for education for health and well-being in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you so much, Jennelle, for being with us here today, and over to you for your presentation.
Namaskar. Thank you so much, Sarita. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, colleagues, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, everyone watching. I really would like to appreciate the CBSC for extending this invitation and actually for just setting up this entire series of community of practice, capacity building with educators to really engage on very important issues, including this one on the issue of safe and enabling learning environments and school violence. So if you'll allow me, I do have some slides to share. So please just give me a moment while I bring that up on screen. And I just would like a green thumb that that's visible. Yes, I think so. Okay. And let me just also. Fantastic. All right. So here's the outline for the session that I will be sharing with you over the next few minutes. It's broken into two parts. In the first part, we're going to take a closer look at this phenomena of school violence. So that will be looking at school violence, bullying, including cyberbullying, including gender-based violence in schools. What does school violence look like? What does the data say to us is the extent of the issue? What are the factors that influence the phenomena of school violence? Looking at some of the root causes, including gender and gender inequality. Then we'll also move on to the impacts of school violence, not only on learning, but on health and well-being. And we'll also finally close off part one with what we know from the evidence works to address school violence. In the second part, a much smaller part, because I leave it to Dr. Yatan to really dive into this issue, but just to set up the scene a little bit by looking at mental health in education systems and what we know from the evidence says that the education system can play to address mental health and psychosocial well-being. So first part, the safe and supportive environments for learners and for teachers, but the evidence tells us that sadly, this is not the case. Around the world, too many children still experience and face violence in schools, on the way to and from schools, around schools. School violence is widespread. It occurs in all countries around the world, and it affects many children and adolescents. And as we can see on this slide, school violence can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be sexual in nature. These forms of violence, they intersect with each other, they overlap each other, and they include gender-based violence, bullying, and cyberbullying. School violence occurs between student peers, such as bullying and cyberbullying, and it also occurs between teachers or other adults in the learning environment and students. For example, the phenomena of corporal punishment. I'm wondering if these figures may seem familiar to some of you. Globally, 246 million children and adolescents experience some form of violence in and around school. 6% of learners experience a physical fight with their peers, and cyberbullying affects as many as 1 in 10 children. Here are some data taken from UNESCO's 2019 Behind the Numbers, which was actually the first report of its kind to bring together in one place data on school violence. There are significant differences between countries and between regions, as you can see on the screen. If we take a look at Asia, the difference in the percentages of students who were either bullied or in a physical fight or who had been physically attacked are actually pretty small differences. But you can still see that average of 1 in 3, 30% of students who report being bullied. And it doesn't actually show on this particular slide, but physical bullying is the most frequent type of bullying experienced by learners overall. This is being shoved or hit or kicked, physical contact. And after physical bullying, sexual bullying is the second most frequent type of bullying. And that includes things like teasing or jokes of a sexual nature. In recent years, there's been increased recognition of the need to address one particular kind of school violence, which is that of bullying. Bullying is a repeated behavior, not a one-time event. Both in-person bullying and online bullying, what we refer to as cyberbullying, involves a power imbalance between the perpetrator and the victim. Cyberbullying often overlaps with school bullying and is a growing concern because actually the line between in-person bullying and cyberbullying is really quite blurred and involves the same peers. Although bullying and cyberbullying are interrelated, cyberbullying is a specific form of violence that requires special attention and responses, taking into account the anonymity of bullies online and the scope of the potential humiliation that can go viral and very quickly, and the fact that so many of us are connected to the internet. How do these issues unfold in your country, in India? You surely know the answer better than I to that question, but here is some publicly available data. You're probably familiar with the 2022 report by McAfee, those are the antivirus people, that's entitled Cyberbullying in Plain Sight. And this collected data from more than 11,000 parents and their children from 10 countries. And that report revealed that 85% of the surveyed children aged 10 to 18 years old in India have been victims of cyberbullying, which is the highest figure among the 10 countries who participated in this study. That same survey found that 3 out of 4 children in India have themselves been perpetrators of cyberbullying. Among the countries surveyed, Indian parents felt the highest degree of concern about their child experiencing or perpetrating cyberbullying. 9 out of 10 parents felt that way. But at the same time, they were the least likely of all the parents surveyed to speak with their children about these issues and concerns, less than half of the parents. At the same time, we know that there's really a rather big gap on local data on the prevalence of school violence in general. And this is true especially from standardized, large-scale routine surveys or surveillance. For instance, the Global School Health Survey by the WHO and CDC, the PISA learning assessment, large-scale learning assessment by the OECD, or the Violence Against Children surveys. There's really no recent data. The GSHS was last done in 2007. The latest PISA was 2009. But of course, there are special studies, both quantitative and qualitative, that are published and unpublished in India. But sometimes those two may be a bit stale-dated. For instance, there is a National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR report, that was published in 2012 that found that 99% of school children are subjected to physical and mental abuse by teachers. And it could be really interesting and valuable to know what those figures would look like today if we had more recent data. Now, any learner can experience school violence. However, we see from the data that there are some children who are more at risk of being targeted than others. Students who are seen as gender non-conforming, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer students, often experience heightened rates of violence from both their peers and their teachers. Children with disabilities are 3 to 4 times more likely than their non-disabled peers to be victims of any type of violence and in any setting, not just in schools. This is true in the home and in the community as well as in schools. Another influencing factor is the widespread attitudes and beliefs about what violence actually is, as some behaviors may not be seen as violence, which can be problematic because it makes the problem normalized or tolerated, if not accepted. This makes it harder to address the issue as we have to uproot and replace those harmful belief systems. Still on this topic of understanding and recognizing violence, in 2022, UNESCO published this technical brief that you see on the screen that looks at teachers' perspectives on school violence. At the global level, while 4 in 5 teachers surveyed of more than 34,000 teachers, with a little bit of a skew to Latin America, while 4 out of 5 teachers felt that it was their responsibility to address school violence, 25% of those teachers did not recognize certain forms of violence as being violence, including certain online acts and certain types of more nuanced psychological violence. And this really sort of highlights the need for additional awareness and capacity building and support for teachers. Now, if we take a closer look at the disaggregated data from India, which is by no means a representative sample, but still pretty useful to look at, here are some of the findings. Teachers were better at recognizing physical and sexual violence than psychological violence. Teachers from urban schools were better at recognizing violent behavior than teachers from rural schools. 8% of the surveyed teachers responded that they always or often or occasionally used corporal punishment. And 29% of teachers believed that corporal punishment actually improved the academic performance of their students. And that last figure was actually statistically significantly higher than the global average, which was 10%. Outside of schools and societal settings, outside of schools, societal attitudes, as I just mentioned, more generally also, of course, happens, also influences what happens in schools. Now, this takes me to the gendered nature of school violence. All violence, whether in school or out of school, whether it's cyberbullying or in-person violence, all violence has gendered dimensions. When we are talking about this, we're talking about school-related gender-based violence, which is any threat or act of a sexual, physical, or psychological nature that occurs in or around schools. It is violence that occurs as a result of harmful gender norms and stereotypes. And it can take place between different genders and within the same gender peer group. And it is reinforced by unequal power dynamics. While both boys and girls can experience violence, we can see patterns in those experiences on the basis of gender. Girls are more likely than boys to experience psychological bullying, cyberbullying, and harassment. Boys are more likely than girls to experience physical violence and corporal punishment. And as I've mentioned earlier, learners who don't conform to the expected gender norms and gender roles have higher experiences of violence than their peers. I'm not going to show this video, but I did want to flag it in case you wanted to have a look at it later. And this is just to really illustrate what more we can say and do about the issue of school-related gender-based violence. So I leave that for you to have a look at in your available time. So what do we know to be the impact of school bullying or school violence in general? Well, actually, there's quite a lot of evidence available that shows that violence affects children's ability to learn. I don't think anybody here or anywhere will dispute that fact. Students who are frequently bullied, for instance, have higher levels of absenteeism. They're more than twice as likely to miss school than their peers. They have lower learning outcomes, lower scores in mathematics and reading tests. And a lot of this data is coming from large-scale learning assessments, so we can show this relationship. And the more often they are bullied, the higher the frequency of the exposure to that violence, the worse their learning outcomes actually become. On this slide, the particular data is still from our Behind the Numbers report, so zooming in on bullying, but these findings are true irrespective of the type of violence that learners experience. School violence, including bullying, cyberbullying, and gender-based violence, have severe and long-lasting consequences on the physical and mental health and well-being and education of children and adolescents. Experiences of school violence have been associated with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts and actions, as well as self-harm. Children who are bullied are twice as likely as those who are not bullied to feel lonely, to be unable to sleep, to have contemplated suicide. And actually, perpetrating violence is also associated with poor mental health, with evidence that children with emotional and behavioral disorders can engage in aggressive behaviors. There are other documented health risks related to violence, including high risk-taking behaviors around substance use and also sexual activity. Children who are bullied and those who are both bullies and victims report lower life satisfaction and lower quality of health than those who are not involved in bullying. Now, that's quite very sobering, and it could be possible to be discouraged. But the good news is that even though this is a widespread problem and it is serious and really demands our attention, what is encouraging is that we know from evidence what works to prevent and respond to school violence and to promote and protect good mental health. And what is required is a whole of education approach, from policy levels through to school levels, top to bottom, bottom to top. What does it mean in practice? And there's components of nine components of the whole school approach are on screen. There is, of course, a need for strong political leadership, robust policy frameworks to prohibit, to prevent, and to respond to violence, and adopt a zero-tolerance approach to violence in every form. For effective school violence prevention, curricula, teaching, and learning should promote a caring school climate, and training and support should be provided for teachers and other school staff. Gender transformative curricula that is focused on social and emotional learning is especially powerful. We know actually that it's more effective to promote this positive school culture of kindness and respect rather than only zooming in on explicit programs that target specific forms of violence. Providing a safe physical and psychological social school environment also plays a key role, including mechanisms to report violence and providing support for everyone who is affected. And by affected, we mean those who are victimized, those who are bystanders and witnesses, and the bully. All of these persons need psychosocial support. It's really important to not label learners who are targeted by bullying as being somehow fragile, just as it's important to not label the perpetrators or the bullies as being deviant or malicious. Very often, bullies have themselves been victimized and need help to address socio-emotional triggers of their behavior. We need to invest in evidence, and we just highlighted the gap in available local data. So we need to have more evidence so we can have a proper understanding of the problem, better target our response, and to also know if what we are doing is actually making a difference for good. Everyone who is a part of the school community should be involved, should be empowered, and that includes parents and, very importantly, learners themselves. In all countries where we have observed and monitored and evaluated successful programs around school bullying and school violence, this response has actually been led by the education system. However, education authorities must, can, and should work with a broad range of partners, including other government sectors and civil society and academia. These 9 components that you see on screen are not a menu to pick and choose from. They're all equally important, and they should all be implemented together, enabling the entire education system to be better equipped to reduce violence in school. So I'm going to transition now to the next section of my presentation. That's taking a quick look at school violence. I'm excited to hear Dr. Yatan's presentation. But as I mentioned, I just wanted to lay a bit of a foundation around this issue because it's really picked up a lot of global and regional attention in the last few years, especially as a result of COVID-19 related school closures. But the truth is, young people's mental health was an issue way before COVID-19 came onto the screen, and I'm sure Dr. Yatan has something to say about that. One of the first steps that we at UNESCO take, or many of the practitioners take in the conversations we have with educators about mental health, is to really unpack this issue. Not only is there a lack of clarity about key terminologies, The truth is that we're also working against a lot of social stigma attached to mental health. In case everyone is not familiar with the relevant definitions, when we're talking about good mental health and psychosocial well-being, we're referring to a positive state of being, a positive sense of self and identity, to be able to socially connect with others in a healthy way, and having the capacity to cope with the normal stresses of life. When we refer to mental health conditions, we're actually talking about a spectrum where on the one end is the non-clinical psychological distress, so feelings of anxiety or worry that we all experience, all the way to the other end of the spectrum that are mental disorders, including clinical psychosis. In terms of addressing mental health, we refer to mental health and psychosocial support, MHPSS, which refers to any support, service, or action that aims to protect or promote psychosocial well-being or prevent or treat mental disorders. These next two slides are courtesy of our close partners at UNICEF, who have developed a regional multi-sectoral framework for adolescent health and psychosocial support, addressing the important and coordinated roles of education, health, social welfare, and justice sectors, whose actions take place in three broad areas and at three levels. At the broadest public level, which is the base of this pyramid, is engaging the entire society and most actors in the promotion of good mental health and destigmatizing what that means. At the middle level, and therefore with a slightly narrower focus, is both universal and targeted prevention interventions around poor mental health, and at the topmost level, responsive care services and actions for those in need of mental health support. For each one of these crucial sectors, this particular framework identifies at which levels the sector's key leadership roles and contributions are the most important, and the kinds of actions that that sector is best placed to take. So on this slide is the focus for the education sector. And the lead contributions are here in the darkest colors. They're around ensuring an enabling and safe environment in schools and other learning settings. And that's made possible with supportive policy and legislation, as well as community engagement. And the second, which is the middle bright orange, major contribution is that of both universal and targeted prevention. And that particular focus of universal and targeted prevention is really, really interested in looking at building the skills of young people for coping, for resilience, and knowing when and where to seek help when they need it. Those same two broad levels from the previous slide for promoting and protecting MHPSS in schools and learning environments are reinterpreted on this slide as 5 key pillars in this recent resource published last year by UNICEF, WHO, and UNESCO. And this covers creating of a supportive learning environment for mental health, not just addressing root causes such as school violence, but all the root causes, including issues such as exam-related stress, learners' material need, dynamics in the home, all of the things that impact on adolescent and young people's mental health, as well as looking at being able to support the early identification of young people in mental distress and making sure that mental distress does not worsen to a mental health disorder and getting them the support that they need. It involves ensuring that teachers are adequately trained and supported and that their own mental health needs are met. And not just teachers, but all the professionals who are working in the education space. And of course, Pillar 5 on partnerships with families and communities. This is my last slide, and I wanted to leave you all with a reflection of where all of this effort is going to sit, because it can seem a bit scary that, oh, it's one more thing that schools and education sectors have to do. But the truth is, a lot of this work we are already doing. Curriculum, teaching, and learning are all part of universal prevention approaches and creating positive school climate as well. While responsive care services are being delivered through school counselors, perhaps even school nurses in some contexts, or other designated focal points. And all of this is already promoted through frameworks such as those for comprehensive school health programming. And I know that India is doing such progressive and commendable work already on school health. And that platform, that approach provides an opportunity to integrate and strengthen efforts for both school violence prevention and mental health promotion. And the different components of comprehensive school health are outlined in the Health Promoting Schools framework released by the WHO and UNESCO. And of course, WHO also has a suite of materials focused on adolescent mental health, including on suicide prevention, that are supporting actions at country level by different actors. Thank you, everyone. That's it for me. I'm delighted to take any questions, and I'm excited to hear the next presentation and to see the engagement that follows.
Thank you so much, Jennelle. I think that was extremely enlightening. And thank you for highlighting all the data and statistics, the negative impact of violence and bullying, including the impact on mental health. I think every day when we open the newspapers, we hear cases of violence and bullying, and the terrible impact that it has on a learner's mental health. I think there is so much to be done, especially, and thank you for also highlighting the need for partnerships and collaborations. I think there is so much power in partnerships, and if we all come together, there is a lot that can be done, and we can contribute meaningfully to the life of an adolescent and young people also. So thank you for highlighting. We are actually very delighted to have CBSE as a valued partner with who we have done a lot of work, and we intend to strengthen this entire collaboration and make sure that the school health and well-being program, the other programs that UNESCO has, also reaches every learner in every school. So thank you so much, Jennelle. And now, very quickly, Dr. Sandeep has mentioned about Chuppi Todo. That is a short film that we've developed in a record time, I would say. And this film was screened in many schools this morning in the assembly, and is being screened across the country. We have got very overwhelming feedback from the principals, from the learners, from the teachers, and we really hope that this film is a beautiful instrument in not only spreading awareness about what is violence and bullying, what is the impact that it has on mental health of learners, but also encourages our principals, our teachers, our parents to be more sensitive. And I think it's so crucial to just hear the voice of our learners. What are our children saying? What are our students saying? So I think it's important to hear their voices. And that is why it's called Chuppi Todo, which means break the silence. And we encourage our learners to speak up, because that is the first step. In case you're being bullied or you face some kind of violence, please speak up. So very quickly, I will play the movie and share my screen, and hope you all enjoy the movie.
हाँ हाँ, मैं डरता हूँ अपने दोस्तों से। मुझे पढ़ाई करना अच्छा लगता है, लेकिन इन दोस्तों के साथ नहीं। ये मेरा मजाक उड़ाते हैं, छेड़ते हैं, और कभी कभी तो स्कूल बस में लड़के मुझे तंग करते हैं, रास्ता रोकते हैं, गंदे गंदे कमेंट्स भी पास करते हैं। मुझे बिल्कुल अच्छा नहीं लगता। स्कूल जाना अच्छा लगता है, पर दिक्कत पायलट बनना चाहती हूँ, पर
स्कूल जाने से डर लगता है। कैसे बोलूं मम्मी पापा को?
आज फिर आने दे पापा को। आज तेरी ऐसी पिटाई होगी कि याद रखेगा। अब जाके हाथ मुंह धो ले और खाना खा ले। भूख नहीं है।
अब क्या बोलूं माँ को? मेरे सारे दोस्त मिलकर मेरा मजाक उड़ाते, मुझे धमकाते, मुझे मारते। मैं बताता हूँ क्या आपको भी मजा आता है मुझे मारने में? वो प्यार से क्यों नहीं पूछते?
मम्मी पापा को लगता है मैं जानबूझकर स्कूल बस मिस करती हूँ और पापा को हर रोज स्कूल छोड़ना पड़ता है। क्या पापा को बताऊं कि मेरे साथ बस में क्या होता है? कैसे बोलूं? मुझे बस में जाने से डर लगता है। पापा पहले उन्हें जाने दो, अच्छी लड़की नहीं है। पापा मेरी कोई गलती नहीं है। पापा प्लीज मेरा स्कूल में छुड़ाना। पापा मुझे पढ़ना अच्छा लगता है। पापा मेरी कोई गलती नहीं है, सुनो तो पापा प्लीज।
क्या बस है? डरो मत। बोलो।
मैम ऋषि मुझे बस में हर रोज तंग करता है, मेरा मजाक बनाता है, मुझे टच करने की कोशिश करता है और उसके दोस्त मुझ पर हंसते हैं, मेरा मजाक बनाते हैं। उसने मेरी कोई मदद नहीं करी।
आओ मेरे साथ। बैठ जाओ। Sit down. दिल बहुत नाजुक होता है। इसी की धड़कन से तो हम जिंदा है ना? लेकिन फिर भी आप लोग अपनी गंदी बातों और गलत व्यवहार से अपने ही दोस्तों का दिल दुखाते हो, क्योंकि इस तरह बिल्कुल कुचल जाता है। आप में से कौन कौन है जो इस तरीके से अपने दोस्तों का दिल दुखाते हैं, ऐसी हरकत करते हैं? सीधा करो इसे। पहले जैसे साफ और सुंदर बनाओ। नहीं हटा सकते ना लकीरें? तुमने तो तोड़ ही दिया। इस तरह आप लोग अपने दोस्तों को डरा कर, धमका कर उसे चोट पहुंचाते हो। हर बार उसके दिल को कुचल देते हो और ये करके आपको खुशी मिलती है। जो बच्चे किसी का मजाक उड़ाते हैं उनके कभी अच्छे दोस्त नहीं बनते, ना ही वो किसी के अच्छे दोस्त बन सकते हैं। आगे जाकर जिंदगी में वो अच्छे इंसान नहीं बन सकते। एक अच्छा विद्यार्थी वो है जो अपने दोस्त की मदद करे, जरूरत पड़ने से उसके साथ खड़े होकर उसकी हिम्मत बने। आप क्या ऐसे विद्यार्थी बनना चाहते हो? मुझे तो नहीं लगता। वेरी गुड। बैठ जाओ। अपनी गलतियों को मान लेना ही एक अच्छे इंसान की पहचान है। लड़ाई झगड़ा तो होता रहेगा, उसे प्यार से सुलझाना। पता है क्यों? क्योंकि एक छोटी सी ठेस जिंदगी भर के लिए बोझ बन जाती है, और आप दोस्त भी खो देते हैं। क्या फायदा ऐसे जिंदगी का, है ना?
Thank you. We hope all of you enjoyed watching this film, and we hope that you will use it in your schools, in your institutions, to make your schools safer, to prevent violence and bullying, and to create a very vibrant learning environment for all learners. So thank you so much. And now it gives us great pleasure to invite our next speaker, Dr. Yatan. Dr. Yatan Balhara is currently serving as a professor of psychiatry at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He is also working closely with WHO and UNODC, and he's a global master trainer. He is a member of the WHO expert group on gaming disorders, and he is on various panels and committees for government as well as non-government organizations. He has more than 275 publications in peer-reviewed journals. And many of you principals who are watching this program today have been trained by Dr. Yatan. And he is one of our expert trainers who's facilitated so many sessions that we do as part of the School Health and Wellness Program. And we are very delighted and thankful to you, Dr. Yatan, for being with us today. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saritaji, for that kind introduction. I'll be sharing my screen, but as I share my slides, I would like to make a brief comment on this short film that we have just seen. I mean, it captures the theme so very well. I mean, the issue at hand that we are discussing today, the kind of emotions the adolescents, children, the students, they go through when they face bullying, when they experience this. And not just the people who experience the violence, even those who engage in violence. I mean, we need to understand their psychological underpinnings as well. But I must mention once again that this short film within a few minutes has given us a message that probably I would take many minutes to kind of convey through my presentation. So please do share this film with all your near and dear ones. It is worth watching more than once, and it should make sense to everyone who is around you. So please do share it with the people around you. Now, having said that, I must also present the part that has been assigned to me as part of this webinar today. And I'll be focusing on mental health in context of school-based violence. Now, as Ms. Sarita has mentioned, my focus will be primarily on the mental health of students, but I'll confine myself to the context of violence only. Mental health has multiple dimensions when we think of that age and stage of our life. But I won't be touching upon all the themes and issues, and I'll try to restrict myself to the context of violence. But again, this lies on a continuum. I can't just segregate this from the rest of the issues in students' life. So there will be times and occasions where I might kind of deviate slightly from the topic. But again, that is connected with the underlying theme of well-being of the students. The previous speaker very well built up a case for my presentation, I would say so, because she kind of highlighted how important this issue is, the relevance, and it is such a significant problem, and the numbers in terms of people who experience it, it keeps growing. And even the impact is quite significant, not just in terms of what a child goes through, but the kind of impact it can have for people around them. And at times it becomes very difficult for the parents, the teachers to even kind of make sense of what's going on and ultimately identify and then start doing something about this. So I'll try to touch upon these themes in this presentation. But before I move to what happens in terms of mental well-being when somebody experiences such a violence, let me emphasize to you why mental health is so critical, why we need to talk specifically about mental health in context of violence that happens in school settings. And again, if I can go back to the previous speaker, she very well highlighted that mental health conditions, mental health and well-being is a complex framework. And many times we don't understand the essence of it, what it actually means. And in fact, when I talk about mental health, I go even a step before mental health, and I start talking from the perspective of health, because it invariably so happens that we try to consider mental health as a very specific, a very segregated kind of a concept, which lies beyond and besides health as we understand. Because whenever we use the word health, somehow our mind automatically starts thinking in terms of, okay, physical health, physical diseases, physical illness. But for very long, in fact, for many years now, many decades now, we know that whenever people talk about health, they have always included mental health as a key or uh, or a critical component of this concept, and it remains so even today. And when WHO decided to adopt a definition of health, they made sure that besides the physical health, the mental and social well-being were included as equally important components. So that's the one part of this definition that we need to kind of focus upon. The second part lies in the second half of this definition, which very categorically and very clearly says that being healthy doesn't mean that we are free of a disease or an illness. It's not just that. Yes, it is important that to be healthy, we should be free of any kind of disease or a disorder or an illness, but being healthy is much more than that. And that's why we should not just think of that, okay, I don't have any mental health problem, and that's it. That's not the end of it. There is something called as positive health and well-being, positive mental health. And that again should be our aim and goal. That is something that we should be kind of striving to achieve. as part of our day-to-day life. Coming on to mental health, this again is a very complex concept, but this, in my opinion, is again a very simple but a very comprehensive way of looking at it. And if we go through this definition, we can very easily identify that why this particular phrase mental health is so critical to us. Because when you read through these lines, you will realize that, okay, this is something that I encounter on day-to-day life. These are issues that I have to deal with on a daily basis. This is actually a part of my daily living. Because when you look at this definition, it tells us that this is something which enables us to cope with stresses of daily life. We all face stressors day in, day out. So if we are mentally healthy, it prepares us to deal with them effectively. Mental health is something that helps us realize our abilities, our potential. As a student who is trying to study, try to get good grades, or perform in any co-curricular activity, takes up any sports, any other hobbies, or any other aspirations, it's our mental health and well-being that helps us realize our potential to the maximum. It also helps us work well so that we can achieve what we can and what we aspire to. And at the same time, this is the mental health only, the mental well-being only, that helps us contribute to our community. It's not just about being healthy at our own level, it also ensures that we live in a way, in a manner in which the community around us benefits. So that's a very comprehensive way of looking at mental health, in my opinion, and it highlights that it is critical not only for individuals, but it's also critical for the community at large. And that's why, in my opinion, it becomes, or it remains, a very integral component of whenever we talk about school-based violence. As I mentioned earlier, as it goes with the concept of health, the same is true for mental health as well. So mental health is not simply about not having any mental illness or a mental disorder, because again, there are times when you try to confuse these two concepts, and we believe that, okay, if we don't have a mental illness, that means that we need not talk or think about our mental health and well-being. It's not like that. Mental health is something that we all need to ensure we have it the right way. We are able to function in a manner that is to the best of our capacities so that we can perform at an optimum level, not for just ourselves, but for the people around us and the community at large. Now, mental health has multiple dimensions and domains. I won't be going into details of this, but just to give you an idea, because it will connect to the second half of my presentation, where I start talking about mental health in context of violence in schools. So there is this element of emotional component, the way we feel, emotions of being happy, being sad, being anxious, being scared, being afraid. It has a social component where we can understand this of as if something like which helps us kind of relate and connect to people around us, how we approach them, how we interact with them, how we kind of deal with them as part of our day-to-day living. And then, of course, there is the psychological component that is one of the three major dimensions of mental health. Now, mental health is critical because it impacts the way we think, the kind of thoughts that come to our mind. It impacts the feelings that we have, that is the emotions that we experience all the time, and our behavior. Now, this will kind of help us understand that why it is so important to think and talk about mental health in context of violence in schools. Because when you talk about violence, and I like to take you back to the short film that we just watched, you can connect these two very well, because there was that element of thought that was going on in those children's heads, the emotions that they were experiencing, and finally it was manifesting in their behavior as well. So that's why mental health is so critical in this concept, in my opinion. And finally, mental health and well-being is one of the most important determinant of how we handle stress. Yes, there are students who experience violence in school, but the way they respond to it, the way they try to cope with it, the way they handle it is determined to a large extent by their mental health. It also impacts the way we relate to others, the way we make choices about ourselves, and it also shapes the world that we live in, because it's our interaction with others being one of the important determinants. It not only impacts what's going on within us, it also impacts what we do with others around us. And that's why this becomes such a key element of today's discussion. And finally, mental health is not something that we need to talk about for a particular age or a stage of life. This is something that is critical even before we are born, and it continues to remain something of great importance till the last day of our lives. So please remember, when we talk about these concepts, as I share these with you in the rest of my presentation, don't assume that this is relevant to a particular stage of the life of the student. These are critical at every stage of their growth, and they remain of great importance of whatever age group that you are dealing with or interacting with. Now, coming on to the second section of what I wanted to share with you, when we think of mental health and well-being in context of violence in schools, there are different dimensions to it. And I'll like to focus on three of them because I think that these three are the most critical ones, and they probably relate to the context the most. These are called negative emotional states. So they may have emotions of panic, fear, anger, frustration, anxiety. So this is something that happens immediately. They experience this violence, and but this doesn't just go away. And as again, I keep taking you back to the short film. If you can remember those two students that we saw, these are not emotions that they experience only when they are in presence of a person who is kind of engaging in violence at that point in time, but these stay with them even when they go back home, even when they are trying to reach school. So these negative emotional states, they tend to persist, and that hamper their well-being day in, day out, even though they might not be experiencing violence at every moment in their life. So this is very important. The second set of emotional reactions or experiences that students can have if they experience violence is something that people refer to as self-blame. What it means is that many a times those who experience this violence, they try to conceptualize or understand it as if something is wrong with them, as if it was their mistake, as if they did something that they should not have done, as if the outcome is a result of their actions. And what it means is that they try to find fault with themselves, and this again makes things really bad for them. And those negative emotions, they worsen even further, since the student starts believing that it's because there is something wrong with them, within them. They assume the solution has to be from within, and there is nothing that somebody else can do for them. And this also kind of prohibits them from seeking help, even if there is a help available around them or outside of them. And second connected concept is that of helplessness. because the problem is within me, because I think I am to be blamed for this. There is nothing else that can be done. There is no one else who can help. There is that feeling of helplessness that sets in. And that again drives that non-help seeking behavior. Because there are occasions when there are students, when there are parents who keep on asking them that, okay, let us know what is troubling you, what is bothering you. We can try to sort it out for you. But since from within the student feels that there is nothing that somebody else can do for them, and they just give up, they feel so helpless, they don't seek help even if it is available around them. The mental health implications can go beyond these negative emotional experiences, and they can manifest in form of what we call as mental disorders. Now, what it means is that these are set of mental health conditions which can be diagnosed as a medical condition or a medical disorder. And there can be multiple manifestations. One of the manifestations that can happen immediately after such experience is what is called as acute stress disorder. This happens within the first month of experience of the traumatic event. There are negative mood symptoms, as I described earlier. There are symptoms of avoidance. The student tries to avoid the situation, the place, the people, or even things that remind them of those situations that led to those negative experiences. There can be intrusive symptoms, and they keep on recollecting what happened to them. These images can keep coming to their mind. They can have nightmares. They can have these flashbacks that keep troubling them even when the violent act per se is not happening to them. And then there can be symptoms of hyperarousal. These students, they become hyper alert. They are not able to relax. They are always on a lookout that when the next incident can happen to them. And all this eventually leads to a state where they are very much distressed, and out of this distress, it starts impacting their other aspects of life, including their studies, their relations with others, their interests, and eventually the student kind of starts performing less and less as compared to what they used to do earlier. So that is one kind of a disorder that can set in as consequence of such experience. We all know about depressive disorders and maybe even anxiety disorders. And again, these are two set of conditions which are commonly observed among those students who experience violence. The severity can vary. It can be a mild level of severity, or it can be very severe disorder, depending on the experience, the way the student reacts to them. So this again, diagnosable mental health condition which requires formal intervention. But this is another set of disorder that can be seen among those students who experience such a violence. Now, many times what happens is a student goes through these experiences, but it seems as if the student is able to handle it well or cope well with it, because what appears to an outsider's eye is that there is no apparent sign of distress. The student continues to go to school, is still studying, maybe not performing to the best of their abilities, but still they are able to study, engage in other activities. So it seems that the student has been able to kind of survive that experience. But what happens in the background is there are some strategies the student starts using which may not be very healthy in terms of coping. There are occasions when they would reduce their interaction with others because now they think that if they don't interact much with others, their chances of experiencing those events, they might come down. So they may even isolate themselves at times. They may start to focus less on what they used to pursue earlier, both academically as well as extra in terms of extracurricular activities. There may be a change in the peer group that they used to have earlier. And at times, this new peer group may not be something very similar to what they used to have earlier. And some of the members of this peer group might indulge in certain deviant behavior. And these students can pick that up as well. And finally, it's not uncommon that some of these students may start using some psychoactive substances. We know teenage is the time when many students they start experimenting with substances, and if you have experienced a negative event like that, and if you continue to have negative emotional state, your chances of engaging in these high risk behavior they may go up. So the adverse mental health consequences we can see immediately after the event, or they may not be apparent immediately after the event, but they lead to certain changes in the daily routine of the child, which can manifest at a later stage in their life. So that's why it becomes even more important to think and talk about mental health issues of those who experience these violent acts. The second dimension that I would like to touch upon is uh, from the perspective of what are the risk factors that increase the possibility of a student experiencing certain violent acts. Now, when we talk about this paradigm of school-based violence, we always talk about a person who is engaging in violence, a person or a group of persons, and there are certain environmental factors that contribute to this. And today I won't be going into the details of all this, but that is one set of factor that people commonly talk about. But what we often miss is that to this picture, there is another important dimension that we must not ignore, and that's the person or the student who is experiencing the violence. And there are attributes which may increase the predisposition or propensity of this particular student to experience these events. For example, if I give you the context of cyberbullying, there are certain behaviors that if a student engages in while being in cyberspace, they may make them more vulnerable to experience cyberbullying. Similarly, even in the physical settings, there are certain behaviors that can increase the risk of getting exposed to violence. So this dimension is also something that we need to talk about and focus upon, because when we are trying to find the solutions, yes, we need to work on the environment, but also at the level of students who are at risk of experiencing these violent acts, we need to do a lot with them as well, so that their chances of experiencing such events they go down. And in case they experience these events, they know how to handle this. A at their own level, and B in terms of reaching out and seeking help. And I'll talk about this in greater detail in the third part of my presentation when I talk about what can be done in order to address this problem in the schools. Now, the behaviors which increase the vulnerability, for example, unhealthy practices while using cyberspace or digital space, the factors which impact the resilience of the student, their ability to handle stressful situations, and the third component being that their ability to seek help and recover from these traumatic experiences. All these dimensions are impacted by the mental health and well-being of the students. And that is the second dimension that we need to think about and talk about when we are trying to discuss this issue and finding solutions for the same. The third and the final dimension that I'll talk about today is in context of people who engage in violence. Now, again, this is not talked about very often. Uh, we do talk a lot about students who experience violence, and there is every reason to talk about that because that is something that is not acceptable. These students, they need help, they need interventions, they need support. But if we just look at this paradigm again and think of this paradigm in context of a school, and again think of the short film that we saw a few minutes back, uh, while the people who experienced violence, they were students, those who were engaging in violence were also students, and they should be equally important to us. And why some students they end up engaging in violence again has to do with so many mental health issues. It is not something that happens overnight. They don't just decide that they want to engage in violence. There is a lot that is going on in their own lives. There is a lot that's going on in their own psyche. And we need to kind of think of those mental health issues or psychological issues which kind of at times even push these students towards engaging in violence. They may think or they may tend to believe that this is the way that they need to express themselves. They may start thinking that this is the only way people will hear them or they will get noticed. And this happens because something is missing, which they should have been doing the right way, which they probably didn't know, or they were not probably able to do it the right way, and that's why they ended up engaging in violent acts. So this paradigm is also something that we need to talk about, because please remember that in school setting, not just the person who is experiencing violence, even those who are engaging in violence, they are our own students, and we just can't ignore them. Saying or claiming that okay, they are engaged in committing the act, they should be punished rather than helped, but they do need help, and that does a lot of good to them as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, these tend to happen. These tend to happen to be the peers or even other students from the same school. So it again is a responsibility of us teachers and schools to kind of think about their well-being as well. So these are the three dimensions, in my opinion, that we need to be aware of, we need to focus upon, because these three are the most critical ones, in my opinion, in context of violence. The first being the implications for the mental health and well-being of those who experience violence. The second, the mental health or psychological dimensions that increase the risk of getting exposed to these acts. And the third one, the mental health perspective of those who engage in violence. Now, what should be our response? And again, if you could recollect from the first presentation, violence is a uh, multifactorial event that is an end result of a lot of factors which are at play. And given that very logic, it is quite simple to understand that even the response has to be multifaceted. It's not a problem where one thing is wrong somewhere, and if we can correct that one thing, everything will fall in place. It's much more complicated than that. We need to work at multiple levels with multiple stakeholders. And again, if you look at those 9 elements of interventions that were discussed in the first presentation, there are so many stakeholders that are involved, starting from the students at one end of the spectrum to the policymakers at the other end, and everyone in between. So it has to be a very concerted kind of an effort that has to be in place. Since I'm speaking to teachers and principals primarily today, I like to focus primarily on their role. Of course, it goes without saying that the students have to be at the core of our response, because they are the one whom we are trying to help, and we are trying to find solutions for their issues. But in my opinion, the teachers and schools are probably one of the most important stakeholders here in terms of the kind of role that they can play. And that is not simply because they spend a lot of time with the students, almost 5 or 6 days a week. It's also because they have a very unique relation with the students, where the students, they look up to them for the problems that they are facing, to find the solutions to them. And not just the students, I mean, teachers are in this unique position where they are able to connect to the parents and community at one end, because they interact with them as well. And also they are in this unique position where they can impact the policies as well, because they can interact with those stakeholders as well. So teachers and schools can be the pivot of this multidimensional or multifaceted response that we are talking about, and they can coordinate this at their end very well. They can do a lot. In fact, there are many things that can be done at their end, at the level of school and at the level of teachers, that can help address this issue. And I'll just briefly mention a few of them. I won't be talking in detail about each and every measure that can be taken, but I'll try to emphasize a couple of them. The first one being that we need to make it a priority. Every school should make this issue a priority. We know that this is a major issue. It's not something that happens in one kind of a setting, rural or urban. It happens in either of the setting. It's not something that happens only in a particular type of school or a particular type of school that has a particular type of curriculum. It happens across the board, across all kind of schools in all kind of settings. So it has to be made a priority by one and all. Second, the schools need to have a very clear policy and they must explicitly state it as well. There is no place for violence on a school campus. This should be the policy and there cannot be any exceptions to it. And they should make this aware to everyone at the school. It should be so explicitly stated that everyone at the school, be it the teachers, administration, support staff, or the students, they must know that violence is not accepted on the school campus. We have already heard about what are the measures that can be taken to prevent violence, and I won't venture into this dimension at all at this point in time. But in context of mental health well-being, we must invest in raising awareness of the students that what this is, what is bullying, because in my experience, there have been occasions where those who have experienced the violence, they are not able to kind of articulate it very well. They are not able to even conceptualize that what's happening to them, why there are some students in their class who are picking up on them. So they need to be told and made aware that what this is, how this happens, and if you experience this, what should you be doing? Not just the knowledge, we should invest in building in their skill set as well. A skill set in terms of being more assertive, being able to say no, being able to stand up for themselves, being able to raise their concern, voice their concern, and skills like that is something that all the students should have as part of their growing up process. The schools must invest in creating what is called as a safety net. This again is a concept that is applicable to multiple issues for adolescents and students as they are growing up. Try to identify people who care for the students, bring them together, and let the students know that they can access these individuals whenever there is a need. The people who are part of the safety net, they need to be told that they are not supposed to be judgmental. They have to be very supportive, very understanding, so that the students can approach them with any kind of help that they need, including if they are a victim of school-based violence. Teachers and schools should be cognizant of mental health implications because they happen to all the students. Many times we think that, okay, violence probably is a safety issue. Yes, it is. It's an issue of safety as well as security. But please remember, those who experience as well as those who engage in violence, there is always a mental health dimension to it. And we should be cognizant of that so that we don't miss out on that. We should be able to offer support as early as possible, and we must ensure that this support continues because the consequences, they may take time to appear, they may take time to kind of go away, even if the violent act per se ceases to exist. So please make it a point that we intervene early and we ensure that this support continues. It must begin with what is called a psychological first aid, being there for the student, letting them know that you are there for them, you will listen to them, you are there to kind of offer them whatever help they need. You are able to understand their emotional state. You are the person in whom they can confide without fearing the consequences or without being blamed. And to the other extreme end, whenever there is a need for a referral to a mental health professional, if you think there is a mental health issue that needs to be addressed by a professional, there should not be any delay. We must make the referral as soon as possible because the early we intervene, the better the outcome is. Finally, we must also extend help to those who engage in violence because this at times is a way that these students are communicating to the world around them that yes, they might also need some help. Let's not see them as people who are committing violence and who should be punished. We must try to understand their own mental health and psychological perspective, and there are many things that can be done for them as well. Because please remember, this age is the age when they are still growing up, and there is a lot that can be done to help them in order to kind of change the way they interact with the world around them. And finally, teachers, they need to bring all the stakeholders together because they are in that position where the parents, the community, and even the policymakers around them will be available to them, will be accessible to them, and they must engage them actively to find a solution that includes multiple dimensions. So just to conclude, mental health is an important issue in context of violence. There are multiple dimensions, and if we want to address it effectively, it has to be through a multi-pronged strategy. But the teachers and the school will remain the key. They will remain the pivot around which others can come together and try to find solutions that are lasting and meaningful. So I'll end with that. And if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yatan, for that very, very comprehensive presentation. And I think it fitted in beautifully with what Jennelle also presented. And I'm sure our principals, our teachers, our counselors will benefit immensely from the discussions, from the presentations that were made here today at this webinar. And if our principals have any questions, you may please kindly send it to Tushara ma'am and she can pose it to the speakers. And thank you so much once again, Jennelle and Dr. Yatan. And I hand over to Tushara.
Yes, thank you, speakers, and thank you, Sarita ma'am. And on behalf of the training unit CBSE, let me now welcome Dr. Swati Gupta, Joint Secretary, Training, with her words of gratitude. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Tushara. And I was going through the whole webinar and I found it absolutely apt for today's time when we have so many students who are, bullied every day. And I get to hear so many incidents. So something like this coming up at this point of stage is God's, giving. So with those words, I would like to thank Dr. Ram Shankar sir. He is the director skill training for bringing us together and giving us a platform on discussing such a pertinent and a problem which is very rampant because it was there in the papers that at least 60% of students in India are bullied in some form of another. So this is a very big problem. I would also like to thank Dr. Sandeep Sethi sir. He is the Joint Secretary Training Unit. I would like to thank Ms. Jennelle Babb. She is the Regional Advisor of UNESCO. Dr. Yatan Singh Balhara from AIIMS for giving such wonderful insights into this issue of bullying and cyberbullying together. I would also like to thank Mrs. Sarita Jadhav ji. She is National Program Officer of UNESCO. I would also like to thank Ms. Rama Raghuram. She is the one who has woven the whole thing together. And of course, Tushara, our Under Secretary, for her presence and for her foresightedness of bringing such pertinent topics for discussions in the training unit and for the betterment of all these schools and the principals and the stakeholders. I would also like to thank our US IT, Sudesh Gulia ji, for her complete support when it comes to IT and IT infrastructure. Sanjeev Srivastav ji, he is US admin, for his insights into bringing this topic on the forum. And of course, the whole team of training unit, they are always there to support us in and out in bringing such webinars for all of us to see and remember. And it is also live on YouTube, so definitely it is there on YouTube for everybody to go back and listen and understand and support students both ways, those who are the victims and those who are being victimized. It is our duty as parents, teachers, educationists that we protect the future of this country and create a better students with better mental health. So thank you with that. And with this, I would like to bring this webinar to an end. Thank you all for being present here. Thank you.